society. Um, Tonight, I am talking about the Wood Wide Web and the miracle of underground tree conversations. Did you know that trees talk to each other? So, from the very beginning, when they are teeny tiny little seeds, all the way until they are dead, trees are communicating. They don't use sound as we use sound to communicate, but they do have their own methods of communication. Now, little seeds have a methods to detect the presence of friends or foes in the seed coat. From the minute that seed coat absorbs water and opens, that seed, that embryo, it's receiving messages, it's listening. And in the case of some orchid seeds, that embryo really needs to start listening even before the seed can germinate. Because in the case of orchid seeds, they are all parasites, meaning orchid seeds cannot germinate unless there is a fungal friend around. And we'll talk a little bit about why is that further into our presentation. So that seed coat is detecting the presence of water, is listening to water. It's also listening to chemicals that are in the soil. Much like when we're walking around and we go, ooh, it smells so good around here. Or we go, we better keep going because there's really a really bad smell around. The seeds are doing that. They are smelling for chemicals that trigger the presence of a good environment for them to grow in. Those seeds are also listening to the sun. Do I have enough light to germinate? And there are seeds that cannot germinate if they can't hear the sun because they are too deep. So all of those signals serve as communication for that baby to know where they are and if the environment in which they are is the right environment for them. Not only are baby seeds listening for the environment, but they are also listening to biotic factors, meaning signals that other living organisms around them are sending. There was a study done in 2012 that compared the ability of chili seeds to germinate in the presence of a fennel plant. And that study showed that even when you block the pathways of air and soil to detect the presence of that other plant, the seeds were able to tell whether or not they were in the presence of a sibling or a plant of their own species, or were they in the presence of a competitor and they needed to grow taller and germinate quicker to outcompete those plants. So at the very beginning, those plants are listening and trying to determine, do I like you or do I don't like you? Do I know you? Are you my sister? Mm, maybe. And whether or not those plants are germinating in the presence of a relative determines their speed, their what chemicals they're going to secrete, and all starts from the embryo. Now, when they get to adults, they don't stop communicating. Those the adults need also to keep those communications open to and that can also alter their morphology. In the bottom of this slide, I have put the name of the article that I was referencing on the previous slide, as well as the link in which you can download and read it at your own leisure. Um, After this presentation and after the video is edited, I will send the slides so you can also read and enjoy those mysterious communications with me. Um, and that communication involve the process of evaluate all the information that is incoming from the environment. And we can separate um, in general terms how that communication is coming through, whether it is tissues that are in the shoot or tissues that are on the roots. So tissues that are on the shoot, that involves that every type of tissue that is above ground, and those are heavily dominated by VOCs, which means that they are volatile organic compounds. All that it is that there are compounds that are disseminated through the air. So every single organism has a particular smell to them. Whether we as humans can detect it or not, everything has a particular smell. And different conditions, just like in humans, trigger different types of smell. Sometimes when we are under stress, we start sweating and stinking up a little. Well, trees also secrete different types of smells when they are under stress too. Now, those smells can be triggers for other organisms. They might be calling for help. They might be um, calling for pollinators. So all of that chemical load, it's part of the communication. The direct contact that the trees have with other organisms can also trigger those volatile organic compounds. Let's say there is a caterpillar munching on the leaves of a plant or a tree. That plant of a tree will be very wise in sending up an aromatic signal that then can call the predator and get rid of that pesky caterpillar that is eating my leaves. Now, in the roots, there's another system that is taking hold and controlling that communication, whether it is the availability of minerals, the presence of water in and soluble nutrients dissolved in that water, the presence of symbionts. There are different symbionts to those roots that can be present and sending messages, and parasites too. Symbionts, if you are listening to me and unaware of some biological terms, symbionts is any organism that lives in a relationship with another. So the fungi that connect with the roots of trees, that is the one of the examples of a symbiosis. The fungus that connects with the tree receives a benefit from the tree, but the tree that connects with the fungus receives a benefit too. Those relationships that are mutually beneficial, those are symbiosis. And then we have something called thigmotropism. And the minute I read this type of relationship, I imagine two trees acting as toddlers. Don't touch me! I don't want your germs! And really, what trees are doing is not as petty as two toddlers trying to stay away from each other, but it's a way that trees evade touching. And there are many photographs that people have taken from the bottom of the forest looking up, where you can actually see that the canopy is growing in a way that orients the majority from the branches to invade the radius of the neighboring tree. It is that ability of the roots to detect that there is a root right there where I want to grow, so I am not going to continue growing that direction, but I'm going to bend and grow in a slightly different direction, so um I am not hindering myself by colonizing a space that's already crowded. Both plants and fungi exhibit this type of growth. So there's a lot of competition in the forest, and through the years, this type of relationship in the forest has been heavily um, highlighted. We believe in the teachings by Darwin that the survival of the fittest is the method of evolution, but that doesn't mean that every tree it's a lone ranger trying to survive by itself in a sea of competitors. What this means is that, yes, there's a lot of environmental pressures that trees have to overcome, but part of the evolutive process is to include or collaborate with neighboring trees, let it be neighboring trees that are related or neighboring trees that are of different species. Um, and they form this collective intelligence where they're all connected through the mycelium. They're all doing quorum sensing, meaning they are detecting what the environment is, any changes in the environment through the microbes that are inhabiting their roots, and they are adapting their secretions and their growth accordingly. Just like colonial insects become altruistic, meaning I'm going to sacrifice myself for the benefit of the colony, trees can also behave in an altruistic manner. And when this theory came up in the scientific community, it was highly debated. But now, most of the recent research acknowledges that there is this collective intelligence going on.
Hey, smart people, Joe here. Beneath your feet, there is a secret network. This network trades resources, transmits information, and it can even go to war. I know what you're thinking. No, this isn't the World Wide Web. It's something much older, 450 million years older, and it makes life on Earth as we know it possible. This is the Wood Wide Web, the most important social network on Earth. Okay, walk into a forest and just listen. You can't hear it, but the forest is communicating. If you've never noticed this before, it's because all of this is happening below your feet. The Wood Wide Web is a network created by fungi. They're called mycorrhizal fungi. And these fungi live in and around the roots of trees and other plants. Now, fungi are a huge domain on the tree of life. And as you've probably noticed by now, nobody knows exactly how you're supposed to say it. But I'm going to go with fungi because that's what I am. Fungi include molds, mushrooms, and yeasts, and as a whole, they're essential to making all of Earth's organic garbage and dead stuff decompose and disappear. While some fungi do resemble plants, they are definitely not plants. They're technically more closely related to animals. But really, fungi are a form of life like no other. Fungi don't fossilize well, so it's hard to know exactly when they first appeared in the evolutionary scene, but some fossil records show mycorrhizal fungi have been living in this partnership since the first land plants appeared in the Paleozoic around 400 million years ago. These underground fungi are essential to plant survival. They also extend hair-like filaments called hyphae into the soil, which pump water even more efficiently than the tree's own roots. Just like we need our vitamins and minerals to grow, so do trees. Plants from rose bushes to towering redwoods need these micronutrients to survive. And mycorrhizal fungi are efficient little miners. They use acid to bore holes into rocks and fish out nitrogen and phosphorus. In exchange for all of this subterranean service, a tree provides the mycorrhizal fungi with sugar created through photosynthesis. Trees release between 20 and 80% of the glucose that they create to their fungal partners. And older trees, like the grand poplars and grand maples, have more complex fungal interconnections than younger trees. But these mycorrhizal fungi do more than trade minerals, water, and sugar with their host tree. They also form massive branching networks of the fungal threads called mycelium that can extend thousands of acres, connecting entire forests. If you dig into the forest dirt, you may see these thousands of tiny white tubes if you look closely. In a single pinch of dirt, these hyphae, when lined up, can extend 11 kilometers. These networks act as fungal freeways for shipping chemical currencies. The fungi can act like a seasonal bank account for trees, giving loans of sugar if the trees need an extra boost. The scientists have found that if a tree is dying, it will release its extra glucose into the wood wide web where it can be delivered to younger nearby trees, even trees of a different species. Trees can also use the network to send out warning signals. If insects bite into one tree, it can send a chemical signal through the wood wide web, and when trees deeper in the forest receive this insect alert message, they produce bitter compounds that make their leaves less tasty to the same insects. Some trees, like black walnuts, even use the network to spread chemical attacks, sabotaging other trees that try to grow too close. Across the globe, there are two main types of these mycorrhizal fungi that make up the wood wide web. Trees in cooler climates tend to host one type, which create huge interconnected networks that cover massive areas. But warmer tropical forests tend to be dominated by a different type, which creates smaller, more localized networks. It's like the difference between big national chain stores and your local farmer's market. The balance between these two types of wood wide webs is important to Earth's climate. In general, the massive interconnected forest fungal webs tend to lock up carbon in the soil as they decompose stuff. And the more local network fungi tend to release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. As global temperatures warm up, forests are changing, and the balance of these two types of fungal networks is changing too. More of the planet covered with tropical forests means those large carbon storing fungal networks will be replaced by the more localized fungal networks, which release carbon into the air, which will just accelerate climate change, which, even though plants eat CO2, is still not good. So, next time you're walking through a forest, take a moment to think about the very small but also very large network that exists under your feet. Just because you can't log on to the Wood Wide Web doesn't mean you aren't connected. It's time we think of forests as more than trees. Stay curious.
All right. So that was a
Hey,
lot to unpack. So um, basically, this guy just gave my talk summarized in 5 minutes. So, what I want to do right now is if you haven't noticed by now, in my world, it's all about the fungi. These communications that are happening with plants and in between plants in the forest are mostly possible thanks to the fungi that are present in that forest. So let's unpack all that this guy just gave you in 5 minutes. And I have a couple of corrections in there to make as well. Um, First of all, he says that is fungi. My advisor, my mycology advisor at University of Maryland, taught me that is fungi. However, I won't get mad if you call me a fungal. So the pronunciation um, between academics is fungi, but truth be told, I'm really not mad either way. Um, and he mentioned that fungi are not associated directly to plants. Fungi have their own kingdom, and this is knowledge that came to us as humans as early as 1969. There was a paper that year that still put the kingdom fungi inside of the kingdom plantae. So there's a lot of fungi that we still don't know. And there has been a really big influx of information that is coming up in recent years thanks to technology. In the video, he mentions that the earliest fungi that we know of is about 400 million years ago, give or take. But the reality is that we have been able to find fossils that go almost to 900 billion, 900 million years ago. So it will be around 1 billion year ago when the earliest fungi appear on Earth. The origin of fungi is thought to be aquatic, and those had motile spores. Now, what we have nowadays is some of the very primitive phylum of fungi retaining that motile spore. And you can see that in the phyla Bastocladiomycota and in the phyla of Chytridiomycota. And if you have heard of um, these disease that is killing frogs, some of those organisms are in the phylum Chytridiomycota. Noreen would like to know, do fungi ever develop their own diseases or mutations to do damage? Um, that is two questions in one. So yes, fungi, there are many fungi that have their own parasites. In our region, there are these beautiful jelly fungi. And those of you who are starting to dabble in mushroom hunting may have seen witch's butter. It's a yellow orange jelly like fungus. That is a parasite of a turkey tail lookalike. So we have those jelly fungi are parasitic on other fungi species. So there are many mycoparasites. That is what the term is for a fungus that attack another fungus. Now, fungi that have mutations to do damage, of course, that is what the process of speciation means. So when a mutation arises on an individual that allows it to do damage to another organism, that is the evolution of a pathogenic species, whether it is the evolution of a pathogenic species to fungi, or coming back to the figure that I have in front of me, a pathogen of other insects, which is the phylum Zoophagomycota. Now, there are many arthropod pathogens that belong to the phylum Ascomycota too, and there are plant pathogens all through the kingdom fungi. Now, currently, we know that there are about 148,000 species of fungi that have been described up to 2019. The number of species of plants, if I'm not mistaken, it's around double that. So there is a lot to get to know. And the estimation of how many fungi species are out there to be discovered is, get this, 2.2 to 3.8 million species. We don't know not even the 1% of that. So there's still a lot to get to know in fungi. And it's estimated that this number of fungi that we think about is about 6 times the number of species that there is in the world for plants. If you want to know more about fungal evolution, I strongly suggest not only fungal evolution, but how fungi are related to everything from the human perspective to pathogens to their diversity. You can go ahead and go to State of the World's Fungi 2018 report, or the new report that came that I'm loving it, and is the State of the World's Fungi and Plants. a report produced by the Kew Royal Botanic Gardens, and it came out last month. Right down here is the link to do that, which you will get when you get the follow-up. Now, I have been talking about these wonderful organisms that are right under your feet. But how do they look like? Well, usually when I say fungus, people picture an umbrella like organism, an umbrella like structure. However, that is just their fruiting body, like the apple to an apple tree. Sorry, the vast majority of the body of a fungus is hidden from view, and it's immersed in whatever that fungus is growing on. So if you see a mushroom that it's growing on a tree, then the body of that fungus is going to be through the wood. If you see a fungus that is growing out of the ground, then the body of that fungus is growing underground. And just to give you an idea on how extensive this body can be, the largest organism in the world, it's not a sequoia, it's not a blue whale, but it's actually a fungus, and it lives in Oregon. It is 3.2 miles in diameter, and it's a fungus that has been growing for 2,000 years. And all of that in this picture in the center, it's how the mycelium grows when you dig around in the ground. But that is composed of single celled filaments, meaning they can be really long, but they are one cell wide. So you can't see them with your naked eye. So right on the right hand side, what you're seeing, it's how these single celled filaments are growing through the soil, and how material, nutrients, and sugars are moving through the cytoplasm, or the inside of that cell. So the mycelium, if you're in the forest, is observable with your naked eye, but the hyphae, which is the name of the single cell wide filaments, that is observable only under the microscope. So these organisms that are growing through the forest floor are have many ways to interact with their plant friends. Eh, I see a great question from Karen. How was it determined that the Oregon fungi was 2,000 years old? Great question. So in Oregon, there's an additional piece of information that I'm gonna give you to get me to your answer. So when people went to examine the individual in Oregon, what they did was dig around all the perimeter. They were able to find it through helicopter. They were flying above the Malheur Forest. I'm sure I'm butchering that name. If you know the forest in Oregon I'm talking about, feel free to drop it in the chat. But the Forest Service was doing an aerial inspection of the forest, and saw these really big rings of dead trees, and they wanted to investigate what was happening there. So they sent boots to the ground and saw that all through the perimeter of those dying trees, there were these brown fungi growing around. So they decided to take samples and examine the DNA of those mushrooms. When they did, they realized that that entire big ring, it was comprised of a single individual, meaning that their genetic material was identical. Now, when you do DNA analysis, there is one type of analysis that tells you how fast the mutations that are within that individual um, have been happening. So, how long does it take for an A to be changed into a G or a T or whatever? How long that change takes? And when you accumulate the changes or the mutations that those in that individual has gone through, you can estimate um, how long that took to appear. However, you also have chemical ways to estimate the age. So whether it is by molecular analysis or by chemical analysis, you can estimate um, how old an organism is. Exactly which of those two mechanisms was used to determine the age of Armillaria ostoyae in Oregon, I'm not quite sure which one, but those are the two avenues I know of that um, they could have used. And I hope that answers your question, Karen. So back to the plant symbionts. So fungi are in the forest floor, they are exploring the forest floor, and through that, then they encounter their friends, the plants. Now, the plants are always secreting and creating sugars. That's what they do. And because the plants have this abundance of sugars, it's very conducive to form that relationship with fungi. And as we saw in the video, from 20 to 80% of the photosynthetic product for that plant can be allocated to the fungal symbiont. Cindy, thank you so much. Malheur National Forest in Oregon is where Armillaria ostoya, the biggest organism in the world, is where it's living. So 100% of the plants in the world are associated with fungi. And their associations don't have to be just at the roots. As a matter of fact, the entire body of a plant can have symbionts, can and will have symbionts, whether it is the leaves or the petioles or the stems or the roots. All of the tissues will have fungi associated with them. Now, only 90% of plants do have mycorrhiza. And mycorrhiza means a fungal, myco, associated with a root, rhizae. Now, Endo and ectomycorrhizae refer to whether that fungal association is outside ecto or inside endo. In here, I have um, a figure that illustrates how different groups of plants associate with their fungal friends. Ectomycorrhizae is an association where the plant says, I love you, my darling, and I know that we care for each other, but you're not coming inside my house. You're not coming inside my cell. You're staying outside in between the houses. So, through the ectomycorrhizal association, the hyphae will penetrate the spaces in between the cells. So, each one of these let me get the laser pointer. Each one of these green squares represents plant cells, and then these orange circles represent the cells of a fungal hyphae. So the hyphae will grow in between the cells but does not penetrate the cell or the cell wall. So it creates then a mantle around the root that actually modifies the morphology of that root. The root no longer grows in this long and spindly fashion, but it will be short and stubby because if I have somebody who is going to fetch water and nutrients for me, I don't have to grow that tall to get to reach that area. I can just stay short and stubby and let the fungus do all the work. So that's what's happening here. The arbuscular mycorrhizae are endomycorrhizae, meaning they are growing inside of the cell plant, but they will never penetrate the cell membrane. The plant is very protective and knows that some fungi like to play it dirty. And while they are very healthy, they are friends and everything is cool and we're both beneficial. But the minute I'm weak, I might start getting devoured by that who was my friend. So those plants will, every plant actually will grant access to fungi to some extent, but the plant cell will not be pierced by a symbiont. It is only pathogens that say, I don't care about your defenses, I'm getting in no matter what. And they open those cell membranes and they open those cell walls. But anyway, we are talking about friends today. That other association is topic for the next one. Anyway, so it's not just endo and ecto, but there are other types of associations here. And to answer Karen's questions, peloton is a type of structure that the ericoid mycorrhizae is doing. Again, it's growing inside of the cell wall to make sure that uh, those nutrients get exchanged. Is just another method of ensuring the most contact between the fungi and the plant to do nutrient exchange. And so there are many, many types of associations. There are many modalities of that association. But what are they really doing? Well, when a plant gets a fungal friend, that fungal friend is providing stress buffering. They are getting nutrients for the plant. They are serving as communication highways, and they are defending their friends. So let's see how that plays out. So, as a buffer, one of the mm, very important functions is to buffer against the loss of water or prevention of desiccation. Now, fungal bodies, the fungal mycelium can go anywhere from 70 to 90% water. So right there, the fungi might provide their own um, their own protection against desiccation via giving water to the plant, but also they are a barrier, a physical barrier against the osmotic gradient. So if you don't know what the heck I just said, well, the way water moves is by osmosis, meaning that water will always move towards that area that has less water. So if you have water going through a membrane, which is skin or a cell membrane, the water will go from where the cell that has less water, the cell that has more water to the cell that has less water. In the environment almost always has less water than the organisms that are living in that environment, especially in the soil. So there is a whole lot of osmotic pressure. The environment, it's like you being in a desert. It wants to suck you dry. So the fungi, by being a physical barrier in between that drier environment and the root, they are protecting against desiccation. And in these images to the right, you are seeing how fungi or the ectomycorrhizae are changing the morphology of those roots. These are different mycorrhizal associations with pine um, that you can really clearly see how the roots have changed their way. And in my very personal opinion, in very, very pretty ways. But the end of those stubs is not the end of the mycelium. In fact, this is just the end of the root. It's just really hard to capture how the mycelium extends beyond the roots because it's so fine and difficult to get away from the soil. But when you put it on an electron microscope or a higher power microscope, I should have said, then you can really see how these root, plant root, is short and stubby, but you have hundreds of filaments that are connected to it and are going farther away into the soil. When you compare that to a soil particle, a soil aggregate, then you can really see how the filaments in fungi, the hyphae, can really dig not only farther than the roots could, but also deeper into those pores. And in the picture to the right, you see how that hyphae is colonizing in between the soil particles in a way that this big root will never be able to colonize. So by being able to penetrate deeper into the soil aggregate, you also can capture water water molecules that might be trapped in between clay particles that are so very tiny that a root or a root hair will never be able to penetrate. But because they're so thin, they do penetrate in these very, very fine um, spaces or pores. If you want to read more about that, I have an article here for you: Soil Aggregate Microbial Communities and Understanding Microbiome Interactions at Biologically Relevant Scales, and the link for that article here. Now, not only are they providing a protection against desiccation, but mycorrhizae are unlocking access to nutrients very much like when what they are doing by capturing water. The same way that hyphae can go deeper into the soil aggregate, um, that is the same way that they can go deeper and fetch those nutrients. For those of you who are leaving, thank you so much. I am running quickly to finish this at 8. Thank you for being here. I am reading you and very grateful that you chose to be with us today. Um, so also, in that association, the fungi are going to be secreting a stimulation, stimulating hormones. And right now, during the fall, it's a great moment to go to the forest and see that. If you go and look at leaves that are yellow, but they have green spots in that yellow, those green spots are obligate parasites, meaning fungi that can only live in living tissue of the plant. And that fungi is sending hormones to keep alive that tissue, and it brings out that first aid training that I received: staying alive, staying alive, ah, ah, ah. Well, that's what they're doing. They're sending CPR to the plant cells so the plant cells can stay alive longer, so the fungi can live longer. And really, by being there, the fungi also promotes a community of beneficial microbes that are also going to be protecting the tree. And this information is especially relevant now that we know that climate change is altering our environments. So the better the soil is, the more fungi it will have, and the more resilient the plants and trees living in that environment are going to be. Even in the cities, where there is a constant influx of stress, if those trees are allowed to maintain a natural microbial community that and a community of symbionts, those trees in the cities are going to stay longer. How do you cultivate those beneficial symbionts? You do that by offering compost, by not using fertilizer. Just leave the leaves in the rhizosphere or at the base of the tree so that the natural process can continue. I have another video here that in the interest of time, I am not going to show. Just a reminder that that same network that is connecting the trees is also serving as a highway for those trees to send the message. And that message can go up to a mile away. They can send triggers to neighboring trees to start secreting those defenses against herbivory that are very costly. Every plant has some defenses, low level defenses that are always there, that are on the cheaper side, meaning those are molecules that are not as complex and the plant can produce them as a standard, as part of the everyday process. But there are other molecules that serve as defense against herbivory that are require much more energy to synthesize. So those molecules that are more effective against herbivory, but also more costly, are only secreted in the event of the plant being bitten. And that bite from the herbivore sends signals to the plant to start secreting those. The trees that are experiencing the herbivory and get the trigger can then send the signal through the roots to the neighboring trees up to a mile away, like, hello, I'm being beaten. Hello, there is an enemy among us. And they are going to send those messages so that the rest of the trees can secrete those defenses too. And the responses don't seem to work very well. For example, emerald ash borer, bark beetle, and many others. Well, there's always an arms race in between the herbivores and the plants that they consume. And part of the problems that we are experiencing today are an effect of the Anthropocene era, meaning how humans have contributed to the transport of insects and other organisms all around the world. Part of the evolution process is those organisms co-evolving. So some of the predators are going to bite and eat some of the prey, and they are in a constant struggle to see who wins one another. And usually there's enough variation in a natural ecosystem in a way that the ecosystem maintains the balance. But when you bring another organism into a foreign place, emerald ash borer is an invasive species of beetle, then you have a new predator that is coming to an area where the plants do not have the right chemicals to fight it off. And that is how you have these really big problems and these entire pandemics decimating entire populations because of the introduction of an organism that did not evolve into that particular environment. Thank you so much, Joanne. This is, I believe, my one of my last slides. Um, so, through the communication system, they can trigger defenses. They can sustain weaker individuals, weaker or smaller individuals. So, big trees can send nutrients to little trees, and they can send inheritance. So, old trees that die and have a lot of nutrients sequestered in their body can send their nutrients through their connections, and the fungi will also decay that body, so making all those nutrients of that dead individual available to the descendants of or the kin of that tree. All of the plants that are connected to the network and to that tree will benefit from the nutrients sequestered in it. I really don't have time to go into this, but this is some of the ways in which fungi mediate that process of communication. And I want to thank you so much for being here with me and for um, tolerating me babbling on and on. At this point, I would like to invite the audience to ask any questions that you may have, whether it is the chat or your voice. I can see the chat, as you know by now, but I can also will love to hear your voice. Thank you, Noreen. Thank you, Valeria. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Hank.
So I don't know if anyone else has a question, but I actually do.
Go ahead.
I couldn't help but notice when the video you showed us of I don't know what his name is, but he showed the map, the world map of the two different types of mycorrhizal fungi, and it showed that there was that second type, the more tropical one, specifically had an area in the Appalachian Mountains. And I was very curious about that. And I wonder if you knew anything like why the Appalachian area for the more tropical fungi.
Okay, there's a short answer and there is a long answer.
Mm-hmm.
So the short answer is I don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
The long answer, it's about understanding the different microclimates that are in each area, and you know about the holographic shadow is it's the name, whether you have a set of mountains and because of
Mm-hmm.
wind patterns, you have one climate on one side and one climate on the other, so
Mm-hmm.
there might be part of that. I know that when you have a mountainside that is directly um, in front of the wind direction, then you provoke the wind to dump all the rain that and all the humidity that wind is bringing into that area. So that creates a very sharp contrasting difference that often you can actually see when you're crossing the mountains, where one side is yellow and one side is green.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings up the opportunity for species that favor a wetter climate to stay there, and also the abundance of water gives a buffering in temperature. So if you have an area that it's constantly wet, it will take a whole lot more of energy to drop those temperatures when compared to the same conditions to a dry area.
Mm-hmm.
So a longer way to say I don't know, but giving you some of what to think about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you, Serenella.
No problem.
I don't see any other questions in the chat at the moment.
All right, I don't see any more either. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for staying with me.
Thank you.
Very grateful.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much, Serenella.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Happy Thanksgiving to you all.
You too.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Sandra.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.